Hi, class. I hope you're having a good day today. I am here with you to talk about a short story called The Third Bank of the River, written by Joao Guimaraes Rosa. Okay. Now, this story is the first story that we are reading that was written in a different language. So the writer is from Brazil and he wrote this story in Portuguese. Okay. So we're reading a translation. Okay. Now, why did I choose this story? Well, I chose it because it's very unique in that it is an allegory. And so I'm going to explain what that means. I also chose this story because I feel like it's very, very moving, very like psychologically complex, and it's very thought provoking. Also, reading the story, I will say, kind of makes me feel a little bit confused in some ways, right? It also makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, right? Okay, so what is this story about, right? Well, like I said, I think that we can view this story as an allegory. Okay, what is an allegory? So, an allegory is a work of fiction in which the characters, the actions, and the settings, right, make sense on a coherent literal level. And at the same time, they signify a second level. Okay. So this story, right, makes sense as we're reading it. It's about this family where the father orders a boat, right, custom made for himself. And then he goes out in the river, right, that's right near their home. And he's just floating out in the river for days, for weeks, for months, for years, right? As the family looks on in horror, like, why is our dad, why is my husband, why is the father, why is he doing this? Okay, so it makes sense on a literal level, but yet at the same time, we're thinking to ourselves, what the heck is going on here? How could this man just be drifting out in the river for all this time with no food, no water, no shelter? It doesn't make sense. This could not happen. Okay, so it's an allegory, right? So, what is it an allegory of? Well, I think that we can read it in different ways, right? Probably the most common way to read this would be as an allegory about death and the process of grief. Okay, so it also, we could say, allegorizes disconnection and loneliness in families. Okay, so if we view the father as dead, okay, why would I view him as dead? Well, there's some clues that Rosa gives us, right? For example, the description of the boat that the father orders, right? If we read that description carefully, it resembles a coffin, right? It's just made specifically for one person, right? He tells us, and I'm looking at my copy of the story here, he tells us that it is sturdy enough to last about 20 or 30 years. Okay, now we would hope a coffin might last longer than that, but okay. And then it says that it was made of a special, right, mimosa wood, right, designed just for him. Okay, so I feel like it could possibly represent a coffin. Okay, so if we read it that way, right, the story makes us think about how the experience of death unfolds for those left behind. The mother, the sister, and the son, they all respond in different ways to the father's absence. Okay, now since the focus of this story is on the son, we see that he is never able to move forward with his own life, right? Unlike the mother and the sister, right? He's basically stuck, right? Trying to figure out why his father did this, right? Because it's also, I think, suggested in the story, you could read it, that the father committed suicide, right? Because he ordered the boat, right? And then the day that he went out in the boat, right? He's very like solemn on that day, right? It says he showed no joy or other emotion, right? He just put on his hat as he always did and said goodbye to us. He took along no food or bundle of any sort, right? And that, he just leaves, right? And that he never came back. Okay, so possibly it could mean to represent a suicide, right? Because it was intentional, right? He ordered the boat and he left the family, right? It was his decision to do this. Okay. Okay, so again, like I said, the father, right, creates a lot of anxiety for the family because they can't really kind of figure out why is this happening, right? And because the focus, like I said, is on the son, we get a sense of his increasing agitation and anxiety, right, over the meaning of his father's absence. And so his father is not truly present in his life because he's out in the river, right? Nor is he fully absent, because the son can actually walk out to the riverbank and see him, right? So he's both simultaneously absent and present at the same time, right? In the same way that people who die might not ever be fully absent from our lives because they live on in our memories. Okay, so that's kind of like my brief, very brief, right, overview of the story. Now I want to just pause for a moment to just say a little bit about the writer, right, Joao Guimaraes Rosa. So go ahead and pull up my presentation on the writer. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, get that up. And I will say, I do not really have that much to say about this writer. I will admit there's not that much written about him, right? So that you can see there he is on the screen. So he lived from 1908 to 1967. So he died pretty young. He was only 59 years old when he died. He, as I mentioned, is from Brazil. He wrote novels and short stories. He also actually had another career. He worked as a medical doctor. Now, the one thing that I do know that is significant about him, right, is that when he was 50 years old, he had a massive heart attack and almost died. Okay. Now, think about that for a second, right? A near-death experience. If you've ever had a near-death experience, you know that, wow, it really does make you think a lot about, right, the meaning of your life, right? Life and death. It makes every moment seem more precious. And so after that heart attack, shortly after that, actually, when he wrote this story. Okay, so maybe he was thinking about that when he wrote it. You can see from the pictures, right, that he seems to be an animal lover, right? He's got cats, he's got dogs, he's got a bird, right? So that's kind of cool. And then I should also point out about him that he won, or actually he didn't win, he was nominated, right? He was nominated for a Nobel Prize in Literature in 1967. Okay, and this story was written in 1967. Okay, so what else do I want to say about this story, right? As you're reading, I'm hoping that you're starting to think about things like setting and point of view, okay? So I don't know why I look blurry here, but I just got a new camera, so maybe it's not working right yet. But anyway, so the point of view of this story is the first person. Okay, so it's written right from the perspective of the son. Okay, so like I said, we get a little bit more insight into his character. And I would say, right, that he is a good example of a dynamic character, right? Right. So we do get a sense as we're reading, right, of this increasing anxiety that he is experiencing, right? He's very agitated by the end of the story, right? Of course, right, he's trying to figure out all along, right, why is his father doing this? Why is his father out in the river? Right. And he's also, right, trying to help the father, right? He's leaving food for the father. He's leaving supplies for the father. And then, of course, at the end of the story, right, he is like kind of making a gesture to the father, signifying that he's interested in changing places with the father. Okay, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Okay. Now, what is our setting of the story? Okay, well, as I said, right, it takes place along a river. Okay, and if you think about a river, right, there's two banks, right? I wish I was in a classroom, I could draw on the board, right, a river, right? There's two banks to the river. But of course, this story is called the third bank of the river. Okay, so kind of like third bank of the river. How is there a third bank to a river? Which kind of makes me think, ooh, is this about like a third dimension, right? A new dimension to what we would ordinarily consider real. You know, kind of makes me think of like the Twilight Zone, you know, this third dimension. Now, who are the other characters, right? We don't just have the father and the son, right? This story is about a family. And, I feel like it's very interesting that none of the characters are named, right? They're just called father, mother, brother, sister, and then the other characters, right? The school teacher, the priest, the soldiers, the newspaper men. Okay, why do none of these people have names? Well, I think that sometimes when a writer does that, it's meant to universalize the experience that he's writing about, right? This could be any father, it could be any son, right? This is something that could affect any family. Okay, and that's why I feel like he doesn't specify by giving a name like John or Mary, right? There's no names provided. Okay. Now, how does the family respond when the father first goes out into the river? Right. Again, if this is about death and the experience of death for those left behind, right? Well, we see, right? Rosa does a very good job describing the response to this absence. So initially, right, we see the family, right, is appalled. Okay, what does that mean? Appalled, right? They're filled with horror. They're filled with dismay. They're filled with fear. Right? They're appalled. Okay, then it says they feel shame, right? Ashamed of what the father has done. And then they're trying to understand again, why? Why did the father do this? And I kind of feel like, as I mentioned, if we're reading this as being about a suicide, I feel like that's, sometimes how people react when there's a suicide, right? That you're first, maybe you would feel shame, like, why did this person do this? And then you trying to understand why, right? Why? Right. And so they have these different ideas, right? Was the father insane? Okay. Was he fulfilling a promise to God? Did he have some kind of a contagious disease like leprosy? Maybe he was trying to protect the family from this disease, right? And even there's like this theory that he's like Noah, right, from the Bible. Okay, so they're trying to understand why. And then after that, right, the next thing is then they never talk about it, right? That they never bring him up. Okay, but it says they're always thinking about him, but that they never, have a conversation about him. They try not to think about it. Okay. And of course, we see the son, right? Because again, it's first person, we're in his head. We see that he is really, like I said, unable to move on, right? The mother moves away, the sister gets married, right? And of course, there's that very sad scene where the sister, after she has her child, right, she holds the baby and walks to the riverbank and is standing there, trying to show her child, right, to her father, right? This is your grandchild. And then it's very sad because, like, maybe she thinks he's going to row in to the shore and say, come off the boat. Oh, can't wait to meet my grandchild. But he doesn't. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't acknowledge her presence. Okay. So, but, right. But again, the focus is on the son, right? He doesn't move on with his life. He doesn't get married or have to get a job or do anything. Really, his whole life seems to revolve around his questioning, right? Why did my father do this? Okay, so again, if we view this as about the experience of death on the people left behind, and more specifically in this case, the death of a parent, right? The death of a parent obviously is something that is extremely painful for anyone to go through, right? But we can also say it's something that, like, almost everyone is going to experience at some point, unless we die before our parent does, right? And that some people might even argue that the death of a parent is essential in a way for us to really form our own identity, right? To like be our own person. Okay. And so in the sense, the son, we might say, is a symbol of all children who lose their parents and all children who need to grow into their own selves and separate from their parents. And in this case, we see that this son is really stymied, right? He can't move forward. He's stuck, right? His whole life, like I said, is revolving around his questioning, why did my father do this? Okay. So, if you don't, maybe you don't really view that this is about death. I have had a students in class who say, well, actually, I think that maybe this is more about like a struggle with some kind of an addiction, right? I had a student once who said that she had a parent who struggled with like a drug addiction, and that the parent was physically there, was present in the home, but yet wasn't really present, like wasn't emotionally present. And so that's how that student read this story, right? That the father, he's present, right? They can go out to the riverbank and see him out there in his boat. He's there, but he isn't really present. He's not participating in their lives in the way maybe that a parent who has like an addiction would be like present, but not really like participating in the life of the experience of the family members. Okay, so really, I feel like it's such a thought-provoking, interesting story, right? About loss, like I said, about disconnection and alienation between members of a family. Okay, and then also, right, I didn't use the word abandonment yet. I feel like that's also a very important theme in the story, in the sense that the son feels completely abandoned by his father, right? And why, right? Why did the father abandon the son? Right. And now, like I said, at the very end of the story, the kind of like climactic moment, right? When the son who keeps blaming himself, right? Maybe it was my fault that the father left, right? He's really like very hard on himself, right? Because he has had no closure, right? When I spoke about that with the Michael Lasso poem, right? That the lover gave the brother closure and saying, forgive yourself. Well, this son doesn't have any closure. He doesn't understand why his father left. And, that lack of closure makes him, it seems, blame himself. Right. So I'm just reading one of the lines from the story that really stands out to me. Right. So one day, as he's standing there looking at the father, out on the boat, it says, it pressed upon my heart. He was out there, and I was forever robbed of my peace. I am guilty of I know not what, and my pain is an open wound inside me. Okay, so like that's like very like it. We see the extent to which he is suffering. Okay, and then at the end of the story, right, he uses the word crazy. He feels like he's going crazy, and that he has this white handkerchief, right, that he's waving for his father to see. And then he says, right, I'll take your place. Okay, so he offers to exchange places with the father. Now, when we're reading the story, like, I don't think I even imagined that the father would take him up on that, right? Because all this time has gone by, years have gone by, right? Now the son's hair is gray, like a long time has passed. And so it's kind of shocking right at the end of the story when the father is like rowing the boat in, like he's going to actually like take the son up on this offer to change places. It's like a very strange moment in the story. And then of course, right, we see then that the son, right, he panics, and he realizes that he doesn't want to change places with the father. Okay. And then, right, the very last paragraph of the story is heartbreaking, because we get the sense that the son is possibly, right, going to follow in the father's footsteps, and that he seems to be thinking about ending his life, right? Because it says, I must stay in the deserts and unmarked plains of my life, and I fear I shall shorten it. But when death comes, I want them to take me and put me in a little boat in this perpetual water between the long shores. And I down the river, lost in the river, inside the river, the river. Okay, So we get this sense that, is the son going to follow in his father's footsteps, right? How awful, right? How sad. And also, maybe I'll end just by, saying a little bit about the symbolism of a river, right? This body of water, right? So often in literature, a river symbolizes a path, a journey, right? Also, it can symbolize the passage of time, right? This idea of water flowing is sort of a metaphor for the endless flow of experience. And then also in literature, right? I'm sure at some point in your life, hopefully you've read Mark Twain, right? The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, for example, right? This river that Huck and Jim are on, right? They're going on this journey, right? And of course, in the case of Huckleberry Finn, right? And Jim, they're on a journey to freedom, right? They're in search of freedom, both of them, both Jim and Huck. Okay, now here in this story, this river, right, we're not exactly sure, right, where the father thinks he's going, right? Like, what kind of a journey is this? Okay, so just something to think about as you're reading the story, right? Of course, there's so much more. We could spend hours really getting into, the details of the story and the beautiful writing. I think that Rosa does a beautiful job. And again, we're reading a translation, right? But just like beautiful details that really suggest the internal struggle of this son, right? Coping with the loss, right? The perceived abandonment that he's experiencing. Okay. All right. Well, that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.